Yeah, right.
I wish I was just smart like Mo and had a better background. More professional. Go
That's
ahead.
fun. Well, welcome to another edition of Real Issues, Real God, a podcast of Zion Temple where we talk about real issues that we may not necessarily talk about on a Sunday morning. Today, we are actually talking about politics, a hot topic, politics in the church. So we have Pastor V with us. My name is Shannon, both members of Zion Temple.
Sorry.
And I want to introduce our special guest, Maurice. Mo, I'll let him introduce himself, what he likes to be called, what he does, who he is, and why he's even on this particular podcast. So you have the floor.
Well, thank you both so much for having me on. So my name is Maurice Johnson. Some people call me Mo or Maurice. Either one's fine. And in addition to my role in the church, my day job, I work for the current council president of the Los Angeles City Council, council member Marquise Harris Dawson, who represents the 8th Council District of Los Angeles, which encompasses the South Los Angeles portion of the city. He just got inaugurated last Friday.
Right.
He's the council president, which means that he's now right under the mayor. In theory, he becomes the council member for the council members. And so the role that I do in his office is I handle all of his policy and legislative matters, which is everything from public safety to employment to housing, homelessness, economic development, and the vitality of our community. So I pretty much handle all of the different policy matters that he wants to bring to council to, in turn, try to improve the lives of the constituents in the 8th district, but also across the city.
Well, let me ask you this. What led you to getting into politics? You know, growing up in LA, you're a PK, a pastor's kid.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? Why is this a passion of yours?
I think it started when I was in high school. I remember elected officials used to come to my school and they would give their speeches and kind of talk about some of the things that they're doing in the community. Particularly, I got an interest for local politics. I think it's local politics that really affects what happens in your backyard, in your day-to-day lives, whereas federal is much more bigger picture. So I remember having an interest in like law, politics, that sort of realm at a young age. And so in college, I studied English. Initially, I was political science, but then I transitioned to English. I felt that if I have a good grasp on how to speak, how to write, how to read, how to analyze, that can pretty much go anywhere. So I did that. I got my first internship working for a local council member in Carson, which really opened up my eyes to the fact that people are voting for someone to represent them in office. You pay your tax dollars to pay the salaries or just to pay like different things that is supposed to improve your community on a constant basis. And so I really got an interest in seeing how that works, how that runs, and seeing that the power that a person has to really affect the lives of people living in their district or in their community.
And Pastor V, that kind of aligns with one of the topics that we were discussing offline that you had. You want to go ahead and mention that about the power of the vote, what we were talking about?
Yeah, I'm really concerned because there are so many, especially younger people, who feel, well, my vote doesn't matter, or why should I even vote, or it doesn't really affect me. And then there's the right now we're having our national election, which we vote for the presidency, so you're going to get more participation in that. But the
Right.
truth of the matter is that the way our government is set up with its checks and its balances is that it's the local level that really has a greater effect on what we do and how things happen. And that's why I wanted to reach out to Marquise as well, because with our current system, there are propositions that are on the current ballot that have to do with what forcing or eliminating mandatory servitude in prisons. And I was telling you guys how I read today, and I don't remember the exact state, but I think it was in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And in Alabama, they have forced servitude, which equals to slavery in the sense, without using the word, because what they were doing is hiring out prisoners to in the public and private sector. and they do this work, they get paid, but the prisoner actually gets very little of the money,
Mhm.
and then the rest of it, the business profits on it, and the other goes to the prison. And so it becomes a cycle of money making. And the result of that has been prisoners, when they come up for parole, they have a lesser chance of um, getting paroled. I think it's like 6%. The national average was 11 from what I read, or something like that. Some great disparity. And so with that, what does that do? That means you're funding or making sure you have enough people to work.
Mhm.
There's a proposition on the ballot here in LA this year that has to do with forced servitude. There are ballots that have to do with rent control that are on. Everybody lives somewhere, right? You're either a renter or an owner. So voting yes or no, and I can't tell you which way to vote, for that directly affects you. Affects
Yeah.
our taxes. It affects, the level of homes that we're going to have and how people can pay for it. So I think it's important that people understand that your vote matters not just nationally, but on a local level, and then it bumps up to nationally because, as we've all seen, our former president had a lot of federal judges that he appointed, right? And
Mhm.
with that appointment comes ideology.
Yeah.
That ideology is going to last for a long time because these judges are lifetime positions.
Mhm.
So it's with the Supreme Court as well. So your vote does matter. It really does.
It does, and I think what I'll add on to that is, I think certainly on a federal level, state and local, your vote matters either way. There's been some conversations, especially with my generation. I'll be 30 next month, and I remember a couple of years ago, a lot of folks in my generation were just now learning about the Electoral College and the
Right.
role that they play, in getting candidates elected on a federal level. So
Mm-hmm.
though I firmly believe that it's important on a federal level to vote. I think what really matters are your local elections.
Right.
Who are the folks that are um, working on the city council, the mayor, because the work that they do in council and when they have sessions directly affects the day-to-day life, even
Most
from a small
definitely.
aspect that you may think is small, of like just having your lights on, having your potholes fixed, having your streets cleaned. That maintenance, the maintenance of the streets is what your council members are responsible for. And so
Right.
when we talk about, how do you survive and thrive in your local communities, it's really your local electeds who makes it happen, and they get paid. And your tax dollars goes to their salaries to make sure that they're constantly making sure that the community in which they serve are constantly being updated, are being fixed, are being worked on, and that the funding specifically goes towards the local communities as opposed to the state and the federal stuff that they have to cover more ground with your money.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you're really tuned into who you're voting to be your council member, your mayor, because that's the kind of stuff, and their ideologies will affect how you live in your local neighborhoods.
Maurice, I have a question. You being the legislative deputy for your district, what are some of the hot topics, the hot buttons that affect Black and Brown people within LA County, within the city of LA? Anything that you can think of that we should be concerned about?
Sure. There's a couple of things that the council is getting ready to take up during a session. The first thing is we're looking at increasing the minimum wage in the city of LA and the county. Part of the conversation, one, it's starting more of like just looking at the wages of hotel and airport workers, and then we're eventually going to look at the wages of people who work in the hospitalities industry. And so it's been a really, really big conversation on the city because the reality is that LA is extremely expensive. And so folks, are working in LA, you know, 40 hours a week, 40 and 50 hours, but you cannot afford to live in LA. And so that's where the council comes into play and the mayor, because they have to decide, well, how much restrictions or what kind of policies do we put in place to make sure that employers are giving their employees a livable wage. And so with inflation just rising and with the cost of living just increases day by day and month by month, the conversation at the city hall now is trying to figure out what is an appropriate increase to where people can afford to to live a good life. The other piece that we're taking up as far as the council with LA is, we're having the Olympics that are coming to town 2028. And so there's a lot of conversations that are being had at the city, a lot of contracts that we're having to negotiate, because typically what people have seen in other cities is like the LA 28 Olympics, the team, they'll come to the city, they'll have their games, and they just leave the city any kind of way. We've seen homelessness, housing, trash, public safety. And so it's a really tall order of what the city has to make sure that that the city is not going to be ruined when they leave the city. One,
Right.
and two, that folks are not displaced who are unhoused. Housing and homelessness being probably one of the top issues in the city. We're having to make sure that people who are unhoused are not displaced. We're having to make sure that, with folks wanting an increase of public safety, they'll typically target Black and brown folks. And so what does that look like on making sure people feel safe, but that they're not targeted?
Right. That's good.
You know what? I don't know if you guys knew this, Maurice, you probably do. And that is that I think Proposition 32 is a raise in the minimum wage. That's on this ballot. I think it goes if you have 26 or more employees, the minimum wage will raise to $17 immediately. And then after January of 2025, it goes to $18. And if you have, I think, fewer than 25 employees, it's $17 on January 1st and then 18 as of January 26th. But with both of those things, then comes, I forget when, it begins to rise according to the cost of living in the future that begins to happen. So that's, again, that's another thing that directly affects us. And my concern with and this is why we want to make sure we vote for people that have our best interest in mind,
Right.
is that when we talk about homelessness and the Olympics together, that the homeless aren't just temporarily housed or pushed to another side of town while the Olympics happen. Because a lot of that, I remember the 84 Olympics, that was a big concern, and a lot of that happened as well.
Yeah. I'm just imagining some people may be listening to this podcast and they're saying, why is the church talking about all this politics? And we have three generations represented. Maurice, you said you're 30. Okay. I'm 53. Pastor V, I want to call you a senior, but you you just made what, 60, 63.
Yeah.
And I wasn't born in the 60s. I don't
Right.
know if you were you?
Yeah, 61.
61. All right.
60,
So,
70s.
One of the things that we were curious about is how things have changed with the Black church and how involved the Black church was in politics and government compared to where it is now. And I'm just kind of curious on both of your thoughts with that.
Well, I can tell you in the 60s, most information about voting, civil rights, and the civil rights movement, the grassroots was the church. Because during that time, it was common for people to go to church, and it was the fastest way to disperse information as well. And so that's why you have the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther Kings, the Ralph Abernathy's, people who are actually entrenched in the church with some audience, and trust was built. And it was the church who disseminated information. They organized in churches, they organized in homes as well. And then that information went out. And so the church was very, very involved in politics and making sure, and voters registration. You got to understand that we really didn't get a right to vote until Voting Act was 1965, if I'm not mistaken. And it's been dismantled in so many ways within the last 10 years. And it's been methodically dismantled with those rights, and the southern states not needing to approach the federal government to change districting and all those type of things. So the gerrymandering begins to happen. But it was a church who was very involved in organizing, recruiting people, and encouraging people to vote and to stand up against the civil rights. Because you got to understand, what the church's mindset is that God cares about people, that God loves people, and He's very concerned about when people are mistreated. And so the civil rights movement was about the mistreatment and inequality of treatment of people. And so that came from the love and motivating of the people of God. And that's why Martin Luther King was such a strong proponent of a nonviolent movement. Of course, he got a lot of his stuff from Gandhi as well. But it was hot. I mean, in the 60s, it was hot. We had organizations, we had the church, we had Black Panthers, we had the Muslim people organization. So Black people really were coming together to get out and vote and to begin to make a difference.
You know, the question that I have, and I'll definitely get to you, Maurice, is what happened. And you're talking about the 60s, and I was raised coming up in church in 70s and 80s. And what I saw was Black people, and correct me if I'm wrong, began to get a little, and even within the church, a little more individualistic. So we got messages about the prosperity gospel and kind of like, I'm going to get mine through Jesus Christ. And we may have forgotten about the whole. So I don't know if that led to the fact that we became less politically minded, less community minded, and more about, my house, my car, my family. But even in your generation right now, what do you see regarding the church and the political power, the political interests of your generation? Your thoughts, Maurice?
Yeah, so I think for me, I've always believed that one of the most powerful institutions then and now has always been the Black church. To your point, Pastor V, I think historically we know that the church has always been the centerpiece for organizing, for struggle, for activism, for programming, for services. And so at that time, you went to the church for everything, for
Right.
information. If there was a person in town who was going to give a speech, you went there to see him or her. If you needed some services, programming, housing, you always went there. I think historically the church has been, particularly in the 60s, the 70s, and somewhat the 50s, the Black church was the only institution that we controlled. And I think that was very, very important. We controlled the times that we met, we controlled the building for the most part. And
Right.
so, it was really that hub for organizing, which has changed over time. One of the roles that I have with the council president's office is I serve as his faith liaison. So I make sure that he has a strong voice in the faith community, but also that the faith community knows that he's there to support them as well. You both might know that for an elected official, the church is a gold mine, right? You're able to talk to numerous amount of people at the same time. And so I think though the church is still important today, we've lost some of that importance for government because I think that individualism has really allowed people and families to really just like, it's me, my family, that's my focus, my job, my family, and my life. And so I don't necessarily need that anymore, per se. And I think folks have also argued that what the role of the church provided was trying to be free, trying to be able to vote, trying to fight against the system. And so though today, our struggle looks very differently than then, I think a lot of people sort of may have the mindset of like, I don't need the church as that anchor to fight against things that may be opposing me or my life or my family, my race, my ethnicity. And so I think we've sort of lost that touch of the church being that centerpiece, especially now, with my generation, we have social media now and text messaging and the resurgence of the internet. And so a lot of how we get our information is now very different. And then also, we've gotten very polarizing in what we believe, right? You have Black folks who some are conservative, some are progressive and liberal, some are somewhere in the middle, some don't believe in the government, they think that the government's out to get them. And so there's this really It's not monolithic in that there's that one sort of fight that we all can see, or we all can fight together for one common goal or cause. A lot of us are kind of all over the place in what we believe and what we think is the best thing for people of color.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that diversity and different political views, especially in regards to Black men. There's a lot
Yeah.
of talk about them leaning right. But before I get to that, um, just curious about your thoughts on the evangelical church,
Mhm.
um, and what they're doing now. Is there anything we can learn? Is it something we should stay away from? And how they have moved into a more political position. Just thoughts on that.
I think what the evangelical church has learned is that they can use politics, politicians, and local government to their benefit. What I've seen in the work that I did with the council president's office is that there is a lot of opportunity for the church in partnering with the government. You just have to know how it works.
Hmm.
One of the roles that I do is making sure that churches understand how the government works, understand how you can partner with us. Because it gets kind of daunting when you think about the separation of church and state, and like the church is now over here and the state's now over here. But there's a lot of opportunity, especially in local government, where just and for example, like there's money out there that can go to organizations to do work, whether it's food giving or clothes or housing, but learning that niche between, the government can give it to the church, but if the church creates a nonprofit, a 501c3, that's how you can funnel all of that stuff through that, which then in turn goes to your church. So I think over time, the church has learned how to work with the government and how to get across that, like some of that red tape on the separation of church and state.
So I have a question. When you say the evangelical church, as opposed to the Black church, how are you defining the evangelical church?
Right. So again, they're not a monolith
Mhm.
either,
Right.
and we have some people who call themselves evangelicals who don't even go to church
Mhm.
because they align themselves with the political views of evangelicals. So I guess what I'm saying is those people that are right leaning,
Okay.
that agree with those types of politics. It's almost as if the lines are blurred
Mhm.
from someone who is a Republican and who is an evangelical. So it's almost as if Christ is not on top. It's really your politics.
Right.
Yeah.
I so I'm gonna say some things. I'm gonna reference it into the quote unquote conservative right-winged evangelical.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Because there was a time in the 70s, 80s, where evangelical simply was someone or a church that was committed to evangelizing the gospel of Christ across the board. It has morphed onto this conservative platform where, as if you're going to be a Christian, then this is the view that you have to have. And if you have this conservative view, then you are a Christian or you are an evangelical. Um, and I think that's been detrimental. I think that it's unbiblical in many of its stances, where especially in its stance for it's really a power grasp. Let me just go ahead and say that. It's a grasp for power. It's a grasp for control. It's a grasp for wealth to control government issues. And it minimizes and degrades people. It, as a whole, it it has the view that everyone can pull themselves up from their own bootstraps when they forget that some people don't have boots. So there is no pulling up from the bootstraps. It makes America as if it's this wonderful place that's always been this God-centered, God-fearing place. And that's not true. America just hasn't been that. And so that's how you have these conservatives who want to present that ideology, but that's not the truth because it's dismissive of the negative side of America and who she is and who she has been. I still believe America is the greatest place in the world, and I subscribe to that. However, in its greatness, it has been seriously flawed with some issues that need to be addressed and can only be made better by addressing those issues. There's a great book, and it's called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. And it's American evangelicals in the age of extremism. And so, and it has to deal with all of that. It's by a guy, his name is Tim Alberta, I believe, and he deals with those issues because it's becoming extreme. It's all the way on the opposite side, and I think that you can't equate evangelical thinking or the Republican Party. Um, you're a Christian if you subscribe to the ideology of the evangelical or the Republican Party. And I'm saying I realize that the Republican Party is not a monolith either. That there are people on either side conservative, but on the side of ultra conservative and more of a norm that within the party. Um, but I think that as Christians, our commitment has to be to Christ. We're Christians first, and that we have the same thing with Democrats as well. Not that just being a Democrat does not mean you're a Christian either, or it's not the right way to be for everyone as well. I think that as Black people, we have sold ourselves short, and we are often taken for granted. Our vote is taken for granted that we're always going to vote Democrat.
Mm.
When we begin to vote by issues rather than by party affiliation, I think we'll be better off and better served by the government because we'll recognize the power of our vote and not just our alignment with their political party. And I seem like I've just been mumbling, but all over the place. So I feel very strong feelings of a repulsiveness when it comes to the ultra conservative ideology that is Christianity.
Mhm.
And equally on the other side of extreme liberalism, that is Christianity on the Democratic Party, that Black people ought to be committed to the Democratic Party.
So that actually leads into what we were talking about, the diversity of the Black and Brown community and how we have different thoughts, different ideas. Some Black people are conservative morality, and may have some issues with the Democratic stance. So just thoughts on that diversity. We talked about how there are a lot of Black men who are leaning right for a variety of reasons, and I'd love to get into that because that's a phenomenon I'm interested in. Just your thoughts on the diversity in the community and those ideas. Maurice, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that I've seen, particularly with Black men, and as I get older and I start to understand how taxes work and how I start to understand wealth and influence, I think there's been this big lean towards right because some people might say that leaning more so left, the ideologies of the left more so prioritizes the poor class, the working
Mm,
class, which is true. But I think we start to get into who pays more taxes, who pays less taxes, and who's taking advantage of the system. I think as you get older, that starts to lean you a little bit more right than being
mm-hmm,
more left. And even in my own life, and and though I work in politics, there's still a lot to learn about how the government works and where my tax dollars go to. But as I become a 30-year-old with a full-time job, and the more money I make and the more I see it's taking out, it triggers me like, wow, like there's a small part, like I see how people are sort of starting to lean a little bit more right, because you're starting to see that a lot of these policies from the left are more so prioritizing the working class. And when I say working class, folks from poor and poverty, and who may need that sort of that push up in society, which I think is important. But then how do you get into the needs of that middle class?
Right. And I think that's a good point. And I've also seen Black men who may not have that income or are concerned about their tax rate. They're leaning that way as well.
Yeah.
For other reasons. There's a thought that
What reasons? Because I surely can't see any.
yeah, there's a thought that the current Democratic candidate for president is tough
Okay.
on crime.
Yeah.
Oh, got you. Okay.
And there are some Black men, of course, not all, have an issue with that. Maybe because they have previous run-ins with the law, or they've been incarcerated and things like that.
Yeah, but do you think so? They have issues with the candidate, but do they have issues with the whole party as a whole, or just the current candidate? Is the question. And is their ideology conservative, or is it more of an ideology of self-preservation? And actually, I guess either way, whether we're conservative or liberal, really is an ideology of self-preservation. What's best for me, right?
Yeah, right.
Um,
So I think that's you probably hit it on the head. It's about self-preservation.
yeah. And I get it with Mo. And don't tell anybody I ever told you guys this. And I know this is gonna be a thing. In college, I actually became a Republican. And so yeah, it was basically the same thing that you said. Here I was a young student. I saw that entrepreneurs got tax breaks. Reagan was in the administration then. I didn't know a whole lot about politics, but I did know that as my wealth increased, I wanted to experience tax breaks. And because I was I was a Christian, I was also very conservative in my ideology of morality. And
Yeah.
so the Democratic Party was the antithesis of that. They were just the opposite of where I stood and stand today, even on a lot of moral issues. Until I began to realize one can't really legislate morality. Sure, I can have a vote. I can help determine where my taxpayer dollar goes. So, in a lot of times, I feel I'm choosing the lesser of both evils, and that's why I'm really strongly um, feel that we shouldn't really have a total loyalty to a party itself, because both parties may embrace things that we agree and disagree with. And I never want to be taken for granted that my vote is for you simply because I'm part of your political party. So I get that. I get that ideology of it. It looks like successful people get more tax breaks, or as one makes more money, um, that being on the conservative or Republican side, I can understand why someone would think that. I don't know if thinking that, but thinking that does not make it true, right? But I can see why one would say that. The idea with the current president, I'll say her name, Kamala Harris, being tough on crime, I think requires an evaluation of truth and reading. And this is what I have a hard problem with, is that there doesn't seem to be a source where you can get your information that's non-biased.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
our ideologies, our thought is it's we are the news media is controlled by just a few people, really. Their own several channels, so they put this thought out there, and either way you go, you can have an ultra conservative or a conservative or a liberal or middle of the road, but you never get news that isn't influenced by what they want you to think. And that is troublesome to me. And it leads to people being in these direct opposites and can't disagree without being angry and cancel relationships and all those things. So we're in a crazy place. And I think that politics plays a part of that as well.
I think one of the things that I tell people all the time, particularly as it pertains to like voting and understanding what you're voting for, is it's important for people to have a really firm understanding of what your values are, and it's your values, which is what should speak into how you vote. I think a lot of times for my generation, I'll talk to folks and they say, "Oh, yeah, I'm a registered Democrat because my parents were Democrats, my grandparents
Right.
were, or I'm a registered Republican because that's what I saw in my community." But they couldn't tell me why, in terms of policies or a person that they're voting for, of why they believe that. It's because you kind of just go by what you saw growing up. But I think it's really important to really have a strong sense of what your values are and what you prioritize in your life. That should speak into how you vote, should speak into what you classify yourself as. I think though I'm young and I'm in that social media generation, I am not the biggest fan of social media in any way. For a myriad of different reasons, but on the topic of politics, it's like it is extremely hard to understand, or it is extremely hard to figure out what's truth and what's a fallacy, right? So much stuff is being spewed out at all times of the day. And with this being an election year, you're hearing so much going on about what this elected official has done or what this person believes. But it's hard to sort of, uh, um, it gets challenging to try to figure out what is real information and what's fake news. And
Right.
so, I used to work for the now presidential candidate when she was a senator. I worked in her office, and one of the biggest complaints that we would get when folks would call was her record when she was an AG of
Yeah.
being really tough on crime. And so, and though I very well understand people's issues with it because, part of her work to criminalize marijuana was that happened to be a lot of black and brown men who were going to jail for that. And so, but what the media did not do was, in that same vein, they did not express, like, she creating all these programs for black and brown folks to stay out of jail, um, programs that fought against recidivism. And so you don't necessarily get to see how, a person is doing good on this topic. All you're seeing is what the news is giving you and
Right.
what they're choosing to share to the mass.
Pastor V, you talked a little bit about the craziness of social media and communicating with people who have different thoughts and opinions. I'm just curious about your thoughts, actually, from a biblical perspective. How do we navigate that? Our churches are pretty much homogeneous.
Right.
I used to go to a church that wasn't like that. So there were a lot of people with different thoughts and different opinions, and I was friends with a lot of them, on Facebook. But based on some of the things that I saw them post, um, a lot of that really hurt me.
Mm.
And we don't communicate as much anymore. So just your thoughts on how do we navigate this season?
Wow, 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 what a question. I I think that we navigate this season like any other season, and that is for at least for the Christian, is that we stay true to biblical context that talks about relationships with people, and how we are to respect and honor people, and to be bastions of encouragement. It doesn't mean you don't speak against what's wrong, but you have to be in relationship. And one of the things that the Bible is very strong on is that, hey, God says, really, you're going to bring me an offering, but you have an issue with your brother,
Mm.
right? What I need you to do is go fix the issue with your brother, discuss that, and then come back and bring your offering. And so, and he talks about how the world knows that we are Christians, really about how we treat one another. And so I think when we hold to those principles, it will allow for dialogue that says, okay, you can have a different view. I can have a different view, but at the end of the day, we're still brothers. And or even if we're not both of Christian faith, that you're still a human being and you're entitled to a different opinion. And I don't have to be angry about your opinion. And so that I won't have any type of relationship with you as well. And I think we have to be willing to see the other side. We can see the other point of view. I've learned that I can understand what some people think and why they think that, while I totally disagree with them.
Yeah.
Right? But I understand why you think it. I don't agree with it. And so we may not be as close, but I don't have to be disrespectful to you as well. And so you have to have that environment that happens. And I think the church is a great place for that to happen because we don't all think alike. We don't all interpret scripture alike. But I think that we owe each other the respect to treat each other with kindness, no matter who we are. And so I think that's how we'll do it. Social media is not, I mean, I enjoy it. It's something that we do, we have to do, even in the church. I'm not a big fan of it because even that is a war to against, well, it's a war to win people's minds and change their behavior and thought patterns. And unfortunately, this generation has so much access to so many things and so many people, yet they're the loneliest people ever.
Yeah.
Because they don't have true relationships. I worry about AI. I think it's a great thing, but I also think it's something to be feared and carefully managed, because it can create it creates things that may not be true, and you don't know that it's not true. All right. So
yeah. Any last minute thoughts as we go ahead and get ready to close out? It's been a great discussion.
I'll let you go first, Maurice.
I think for me, I think it's definitely and always encouraging people to vote because your vote matters at all levels of government. I think speaking particularly to Black people, what I tell my peers all the time is even if you're not interested in politics, even if you're not interested in this ballot measure and this proposition, I think for the mere fact that your ancestors and Black people historically have fought for the right to vote, that enough should give you the encouragement to just put your ballot in. Just, we know the history has been documented over time that Black folks were hosed, beaten and all these things just for the right to vote, which all people should have. So I think for that very fact that people fought for that right, that should not be taken lightly, and folks should always try to, if you can, should always do your part and vote.
Yeah, I would also, that's what I was going to say, make sure that you vote. And, I know for you guys, that might seem like it was so long ago because you only see pictures.
Right.
That happening. But I remember watching the news and seeing it happen. I've also been down in the South and my wife has had this experience too, of going to the doctor with her grandfather, and he peeks and shows her the other side of the place where white people went, and she saw the disparity. It was nice and clean, and their little water fountain and area was just dirty, of the inequality. It wasn't that long ago, and we've got to understand that it wasn't that long ago. It was in this lifetime that we've earned the right to vote. And so, yes, please exercise that right to vote. October 21st, I believe, is the last day to register to vote. October 21st. Elections November the 5th, and here in I think our ballots will start coming out October 7th, that you can begin voting by mail. As with voting by mail ballots are going to come out on or around the 7th of October. But October 21st is the last day to register. If you haven't registered, please register, because your vote makes a difference. It really, really does.
And as I was thinking, I think there's a lot of fear on both sides.
Yeah.
And my thought is that this is specifically for those who are believers. Trust God, vote, but trust God, because God got us whichever way it goes. So that fear that you may have based on what you've been listening, what you've been hearing, value the word of God and the love that He has for us over that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, thank you guys both for being with us. If you're listening to this, please like it, share it to your neighbors, your friends. I think it would be a powerful message to others.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, you guys. Blessings to you.